On a Tuesday morning in late September, a woman pulled her silver sedan into my bay with the kind of look on her face that I have seen 1,000 times. Not panic, not anger, just quiet dread. She handed me her phone before she even said hello. On the screen was a text from her dealership that said, "Check engine light diagnostic complete. Mass airflow sensor replacement recommended. Parts and labor, $487. She asked me one question. Is it really that bad? I told her to give me 15 minutes. I did not replace the sensor. I did not order a part. I spent $8 on a can of spray cleaner. I took the sensor out with a single screwdriver, spent 4 minutes cleaning it in my driveway, let it dry, put it back, cleared the code, and sent her on her way. 2 weeks later, she texted me. The light never came back. The car drives perfect. That moment is why this video exists. Because what happened to her is not rare. It is the norm. It happens in shops across the country every single day, and most drivers never find out how simple the fix really was. Today, I am pulling back the curtain on the most overcharged, most misdiagnosed, most unnecessarily replaced sensor in your entire vehicle. I am going to show you exactly what it does, exactly why it fails, and exactly how to fix it yourself for under $10 before a shop talks you into spending $500. Here is the part that makes this so dangerous. Unlike a misfiring engine or a grinding brake, a dirty mass airflow sensor does not announce itself dramatically. It whispers. The car still starts, it still drives, it still accelerates. The symptoms are subtle enough that most drivers write them off as just how the car feels now. Fuel economy drops slowly, maybe 20 or 30% over several months. Throttle response gets sluggish on acceleration. The idle occasionally feels slightly off at a red light. Sometimes there is a faint hesitation when you first press the gas. Nothing that makes you pull over. Nothing that feels urgent. And then one morning, the check engine light comes on, and the scanner at the parts store spits out a code, and suddenly a service advisor is explaining why you need a new sensor, a diagnostic fee, and an hour of labor. But here is what they almost never tell you. In the majority of cases, that sensor is not broken. It is dirty. To understand why that distinction matters so much, you need to understand what this sensor actually does. The mass airflow sensor, which most technicians just call the MAF, sits in the air intake tract between the air filter and the throttle body. Its entire job is to measure the volume and density of air entering the engine and report that number to the engine control unit. That number is critical. The ECU uses it to calculate exactly how much fuel to inject. Every fraction of a second, the MAF sensor is feeding the computer precise airflow data, and the computer is making fuel delivery decisions based entirely on that data. If the number is accurate, combustion is clean, efficient, and balanced. If the number is wrong, everything downstream goes wrong with it. Most modern vehicles use what is called a hot wire mass airflow sensor. Inside the sensor housing, there is a very fine heated wire, sometimes barely thicker than a human hair, suspended in the airflow path. As air flows over that wire, it cools the wire down. The sensor measures how much electrical current is required to keep that wire at a constant temperature. More airflow means more cooling and more current required. The ECU reads that current value and converts it into grams of air per second. At idle, a typical engine might see 4 to 7 grams per second. At wide open throttle, that number climbs dramatically. The ECU trusts those numbers completely. It does not double-check them. It does not question them. It simply reacts to them and injects fuel accordingly. That blind trust is exactly where the problem begins, Because over time, that fine heated wire gets coated. Every bit of air that enters your engine carries microscopic particles, dust, oil vapor from the crankcase ventilation system, pollen, and fine debris from a degrading air filter. Under normal conditions, the air filter catches most of it, but not all of it. Some contamination gets through, and when it reaches that hot wire, it bakes on, slowly, invisibly. Over thousands of miles, a thin film of contamination builds up on the wire's surface. It does not take much. Even a thin coating acts as insulation, preventing the wire from cooling as quickly as it should when air passes over it. The sensor interprets that slower cooling as less airflow, so it reports a lower number to the Engine Control Unit (ECU). And the engine control unit, trusting that number completely, adjusts fuel delivery accordingly. It runs the engine richer. It dumps in more fuel to compensate for what it believes is less incoming air. This is where your fuel economy disappears. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just slowly, quietly, consistently. The engine is burning more fuel than it needs to, and the driver has no idea because the car still feels mostly normal. The ECU is doing its job perfectly. It is compensating. It is keeping combustion smooth by adding extra fuel, but it is doing so based on false information, and the cost of that false information lands directly in your gas budget. I have seen long-term fuel trims elevated by 15, 20, even 25% on cars with dirty mass airflow sensors. That is not a small number. That is potentially hundreds of dollars a year in wasted fuel for a driver who never connects the slow creep of increased fill-up frequency to a sensor coated in less contamination than you could see with the naked eye. And then there is the cascade. When the ECU runs rich for extended periods, unburned fuel starts washing into the exhaust. Catalytic converters are not designed to process that volume of excess fuel. Over time, they overheat. Carbon builds on intake valves. Oil contamination increases because raw fuel seeps past the piston rings during combustion. What started as a dirty sensor slowly becomes a much more expensive problem, simply because nobody cleaned $8 worth of buildup off a hot wire. The codes the engine control unit stores when it finally decides something is wrong are typically P0101, which flags the mass airflow sensor circuit as out of range, or P0102, which indicates the sensor is reporting lower than expected values. When a generic code scanner at a parts store pulls one of those codes, it will display mass airflow sensor. This is where drivers get hurt. There is a deeply ingrained assumption in the repair industry, and unfortunately in the public, that a code pointing at a component means that component needs to be replaced. That is not how diagnostics work. The code is not a diagnosis. It is a direction. It is the engine control unit saying the mass airflow sensor data fell outside expected range. That tells you where to look. It does not tell you what to do next. A sensor reading out of range because it is dirty is not a failed sensor. It is a contaminated sensor. Those are two completely different problems with completely different solutions. One costs $8 and 15 minutes. The other costs between $150 and $500 depending on who you ask and whether you are at a dealer or an independent shop. The part itself, a quality mass airflow sensor from Bosch, Denso, or Hitachi, typically runs between $80 and $200 depending on the vehicle. The labor to swap it is modest because it is usually 2 screws and 1 electrical connector. But the diagnostic fee, the labor, the shop markup on parts, all of it stacks up fast. And the worst part is that in a large number of cases, the replacement sensor goes in and the problem disappears, so the shop looks like a hero. They just never told you the $8 cleaning might have achieved the exact same result. I want to be clear about something important here. Dirty sensors are overwhelmingly the most common cause of mass airflow-related codes, especially in vehicles under 150,000 miles that have received even basic air filter maintenance. Truly failed sensors exist. They do happen, particularly on high-mileage vehicles or after physical damage to the intake system. But they are far less common than the repair industry's default move of replacement would suggest. The filter that separates a dirty sensor from a dead sensor is 15 minutes and a can of cleaner. Most shops skip that step entirely, not because they are incompetent, because the business model rewards replacement, not cleaning. A cleaned sensor cannot be invoiced at $150 in labor. A replaced sensor can. Here is how to do it correctly. First and most importantly, you must use the right product. This is not optional. The hot wire inside your mass airflow sensor, sometimes called the MAF sensor, is extraordinarily fragile. Any cleaner that leaves residue, any cleaner with oil or lubricants, any brake cleaner or carburetor cleaner can damage or contaminate the wire permanently and turn a dirty sensor into a genuinely broken one. The product you need is a cleaner specifically formulated for mass airflow sensors. CRC, Mass Airflow Sensor Cleaner, is the industry standard, the first product specifically developed for this application, and it is available at every auto parts store for under $10. Do not substitute. Do not improvise. Use the right tool. Let the engine cool completely before you begin. A hot wire touched by anything, even cold spray, can be damaged. Once the engine is cold, open the hood and follow the large air intake duct from the air filter box toward the engine. The mass airflow sensor will be sitting in that duct, clamped in place with an electrical connector on the side. Disconnect the connector first, then loosen the clamps holding the sensor in the duct. Most vehicles use a standard screwdriver clamp or a T20 Torx screw, and the whole removal takes under 2 minutes. Handle the sensor carefully. Do not shake it, do not drop it, and never touch the interior wire element with your fingers, a brush, a cloth, or the nozzle of the spray can. Hold the sensor away from the vehicle over a clean surface. Apply 10 to 15 short bursts of the MAF cleaner directly onto the hot wire element from about 4 to 6 inches away. Let gravity and the solvent do the work. You will see the contamination lift and run off. Rotate the sensor and repeat from another angle to cover all surfaces of the element. Then set it down on a clean towel and walk away. This is the step most people rush. Let it air dry completely. No compressed air, no heat, no towels. The cleaner needs to fully evaporate before the wire is subjected to electrical current again. 15 to 20 minutes is typically enough, but there is no penalty for waiting longer. Once dry, reinstall the sensor, tighten the clamps, reconnect the electrical connector, and make sure everything is seated properly. If you have an OBD2 scanner, clear the stored codes. If you do not, many auto parts stores will clear codes for free, or you can disconnect the negative battery terminal for 60 seconds to reset the system. Then drive normally for 15 to 20 minutes to allow the ECU to relearn accurate fuel trim values based on the now clean sensor data. Watch for the light. In the majority of cases, it will not return. If the code does return quickly, pay attention to what code comes back and whether any new codes appear alongside it. A returning P0101 code, combined with elevated fuel trims and no improvement in symptoms, is the signal to look further. At that point, check the intake boot, the rubber duct between the mass airflow sensor and the throttle body, for cracks or tears. Unmetered air entering through a split boot will throw off mass airflow readings just as severely as a dirty sensor, and it costs the same to fix. Inspect the air filter. If it is clogged or oil-soaked, replace it before trusting any sensor reading downstream of it. Check the wiring harness connector for corrosion or loose terminals. These are the real diagnostic steps that should happen before any sensor replacement is ever authorized. If you have addressed all of those items, cleaned the sensor, checked the intake for leaks, verified a clean air filter, and the code keeps returning with the same symptoms, then a replacement sensor becomes a legitimate conclusion. When you reach that point, stay away from no-name unbranded sensors. A cheap mass airflow sensor that reads imprecisely creates the same problem as a dirty sensor, and sometimes makes it worse. OEM, Bosch, Denso, and Hitachi are the brands that match factory specifications and will not introduce new drivability issues through inaccurate readings. The investment in a quality part is worth every dollar at that stage because you have already confirmed the sensor itself is the problem. Understand something fundamental before you ever get to that decision. The correct sequence is clean first, then evaluate, then replace if necessary. Do not replace first and hope for the best. The sequence matters because it saves money, because it reveals whether the sensor is actually at fault, and because it prevents replacing a part that was never the real problem. I have talked to drivers who replaced the mass airflow sensor on a shop's recommendation, paid $400, drove for 2 weeks, and had the light come back because the real cause was a cracked intake boot that nobody looked at. The new sensor went in and performed perfectly, but unmetered air entering through the split rubber kept throwing the readings off. That driver spent $400 and still needed a $20 repair. The $8 cleaning followed by a thorough inspection would have caught the boot, solved the actual problem, and cost under $50 in total. This is the pattern. This is what keeps happening. It keeps happening because the system is built around replacing components, not diagnosing root causes. Once you understand this, once you know what the mass airflow sensor does, why it gets dirty, what a dirty sensor actually costs you in fuel and downstream damage, and how straightforward the correct diagnostic sequence is, you are no longer the driver sitting in a waiting room agreeing to a repair you do not fully understand. You are the driver who walks in and says, "Did you clean it first?" That one question changes the entire conversation. It signals that you know what you are talking about. It forces a shop to justify a $400 recommendation before you agree to it. In many cases, it is the question that sends a technician back into the shop to try the $8 solution they should have tried first. Before this video ends, here is what I want you to take away. Not fear of mechanics, not paranoia about every repair recommendation, just clarity. The mass airflow sensor is one of the most important sensors in your engine, and one of the most reliably fixable when problems appear. Dirty sensors vastly outnumber failed ones. The cleaning process is simple, safe, and cheap. The diagnostic sequence is clean, inspect, then decide. The product you need costs less than a fast food lunch. Your car is not broken nearly as often as a $400 estimate suggests. Now you have the knowledge to prove it. If this saved you money or changed the way you think about check engine lights, hit like so more drivers see it. Subscribe if you want to keep learning how to stop being the person who just hands over their credit card and hopes for the best. Drop a comment if you have ever fixed a MAF code with a can of cleaner after a shop quoted you for a full replacement. Those stories deserve to be told. The most expensive repairs are not always the ones your car actually needs. They are the ones you agreed to before you understood your options.